Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me at the Winner's Circle. My name is Brandon Bedford, the Competitive Enablement Manager at Klue, and today I'm moderating a panel on distributing win-loss insights across the entire business. And I'm joined by my esteemed panelists here. I'd love for you all to just do a very quick introduction, maybe share your name, where you're from, your title, and also how long you've been involved in win-loss. So maybe we'll start with Derek.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. So I'm Derek O'Grady. I'm the Vice President of Customer Experience at Forrester. I would have to say I've been involved in win-loss reporting for about 10 years, but since I've been at Forrester, which has been about 2 years, we're really taking a deep dive, not only on the reporting, but on the analytics. I think that's really crucial for us. We consider it part of our Voice of Customer program. That's why it's rolling up to me in CX.
Awesome. And how about yourself, Valerie?
So I'm Valerie Bonaldo. I'm Director of Product Marketing, focused on competitive intelligence at Seismic Software. And I've been with Seismic for a little over 2 years now, running our win-loss program. But I would say I've been involved with win-loss for the last 6 years at various companies, sometimes running it on my own and now being able to partner with DoubleCheck and running our win-loss program here at Seismic.
Awesome. And perfect segue to Ryan.
Hi, I'm Ryan Sorley. I'm with DoubleCheck Research. I'm the founder, and I've been involved in win-loss for about 25 years. My career started in sales and then sales leadership, and then moved full-time into win-loss about 8 years ago. So glad to be here.
Awesome. And so to really dive right into this topic, so the panel today is all about distributing the insights from your win-loss program. So I'd like to start with you, Ryan. Obviously, as part of DoubleCheck and your history with win-loss, you've seen many different win-loss programs, probably the good, the bad, the ugly. I'm curious, why do you think the distribution of insights is such an important topic?
It's a place that people tend to get hung up with win-loss programs. So they collect a lot of information through interviews and surveys. They end up with this big mound of data. But the challenge for a lot of folks is what to do with that mound of data. How should they create research deliverables, or who should they share it with or not share it with? So I think a lot of people end up getting stuck in this kind of cycle of not knowing what to do. And for that reason, it could make the program start to lose momentum. So we believe that smart distribution ends up amplifying the value of the program, which leads to meaningful change, actions that drive meaningful results. So super important topic that a lot of people struggle with today.
Awesome. And I love the way you think of that as like amplifying the impact of the program itself. And so I'd love to toss it to you, Valerie. I know when we were preparing for the session, you had shared actually that you've had recent success in senior leaders at Seismic actually using your insights. So I was hoping you could speak a little bit about that experience and how that's been going so far.
Great. So I would say what really helped is that from the start, we pulled together key stakeholders across our organization. Folks from sales, marketing, enablement, product, operations, to really determine what was important for them to learn if we ran a win-loss program. And this really helped me to develop the survey and the interview guide that would be used. And right from the start, when we saw our first quarter of results, the senior leaders really saw the value in what we were finding out through our win-loss program. And it was around just learning about engagement with our buyers and how we were running demos and product offering. And that really drove discussions around opportunities for us to make changes or corrections that could be made. And that really helped by being able to sort of point in one area and then bring forward the metrics that we were measuring against to see, did we make any notable changes from quarter to quarter? Are we moving things in the positive direction that we're hoping for? So really being able to hone in and understand what do the stakeholders want to gain from this program, and then being able to basically give them their answers that they were seeking. And that really helps them to be able to use the data and see what we're learning and then share it with their teams. It gives them an area to point to and to know where to aim.
I love that. And so I'm hearing a couple things there. One was this concept of kind of getting early wins and showing the impact early on, kind of gave that direction, and also sounds like built some relationship with those senior leaders, but also the setting of those objectives early on in the program, which I know we'll touch on more in today's panel. I want to toss that to Derek, because I think, Derek, your experience at Forrester is unique in that kind of coming to the Winloss program from the customer experience lens. It sounds like you had very clear objectives around what you're going to achieve, and perhaps those goals have evolved over time. So I'd love to hear your experience coming from customer experience.
Yeah, no, great. There's really a two-part answer to that. So just as, with my CX leader hat on, I'm really gold with retention, right? That's our goal here. We want to create experiences for customers that lead them to continue to be customers, right? So a little bit of a different perspective than your traditional win-loss, maybe coming from a sales background. So as I mentioned earlier, we really consider this a key listening post for our Voice of Customer program. So that's the overarching piece, and we're focused more on churn and retention as opposed to win-loss. We do that as well, but specific focus on retention. I think the other piece, though, and it builds on what Valerie was talking about, there's a what's in it for me that you really have to make sure you're clear on. So we could say, hey, we're doing win-loss reporting, and people say, great, I kind of get it. But if we have a very specific reason why we're doing it, and most recently we had a fairly large product launch, we wanted to do some retention reporting, some churn reporting on existing customers, really to tee up insights to our product teams, to our digital strategy teams, to our customer success teams who would have to design and support the new products.
Awesome. So I want to touch on something you mentioned there around the metrics, because that's a great point. So coming from the customer experience lens, as you mentioned, you're looking at renewal, you're looking at churn, and having those metrics carved out gave you that clear kind of North Star. And that's something you just touched on as well, Valerie, is around having those metrics. What kind of metrics do you use at Seismic, and how do you think about that kind of what's in it for me or what's in it for them as you think about those other stakeholders that you're supporting?
That's a great question. And this is something that we have evolved over the quarters as we're learning more and more. But we're asking questions around the experience with the seller. We're asking questions around experience with our messaging what they're learning from our website before they even start the conversations. We're asking them what's important to them as they're looking to buy an enablement software. They have certain criteria that they've set out to purchase. How are we meeting that criteria? So understanding the importance of it so that we can make sure that our message is resonating with them. And if it's not, that we're looking internally to figure out how to drive an initiative around that change that's needed. So those are some of the metrics that we're using to try and measure. And as we're doing it quarter over quarter, having been doing this for almost 2 years now, we've been able to see how it's changed over time. And that's been very helpful and very motivating for the leaders who are using this data, who want to reflect back on, well, how does it compare to what we did last quarter and this quarter?
Awesome. And so I want to dive into that topic more, but maybe before we do, to provide a little bit more context, I think we're all familiar with DoubleCheck's process of providing these learning objectives early on. And it sounds like that's kind of like the step one to this, which is have that, what's in it for me, engage those stakeholders early on. Ryan, could you maybe touch on that kind of that initial process that you recommend and that you implement with clients? And then I'd love to kind of circle back towards kind of step 2 and step 3 that Valerie's touching on around how those may change. But yeah, maybe just to start around that initial process of gathering those objectives.
Yeah, so it's just super important that when you're launching a win-loss program, you really know what the individual objectives are for each one of your kind of functional areas. So we always recommend going to the leader within that group. It could be product, customer success, customer experience, sales, product marketing, and asking, hey, what are you looking to learn through this effort? What's most important to you right now? And then you want to start to dig into if you have this information today, what would you do with it? Are you going to just keep it on your laptop and look at it? Or are you actually going to bake it into a product road mapping quarterly meeting that you have, or an upcoming sales enablement session that you're planning at the mid-year meeting, or maybe you have a board meeting coming up, and you really need a lot of great competitive intelligence. So by doing that, what happens is those leaders start to lean into the program that much more, and they start to get really excited about the outcome that is yet to come. And they start to visualize and depend on what it is that you'll be producing for them. So you end up getting a lot of people to have a sense of ownership into the program. It becomes stickier, and the program takes off as a result of it. So it's a super important step to not skip at the beginning. And then you need to kind of go back to it on a quarterly or biannual basis, because those leaders' needs change. They shift constantly. So you want to keep that conversation going.
I love that. And I think what you pointed out there, if I'm hearing you correctly, Ryan, is, asking those typically senior leaders in those departments what's important to them, but then also getting clear on how are they going to use that intel, right? Is it going to be in a product roadmap deck or an enablement session or training, or is sales going to use this to rethink the sales process, and really getting crystal clear? And then I love that concept of getting them excited about the results that haven't even come yet, but it's getting that early buy-in that it sounds like is so critical, and why that's such an important first step in the program. So maybe to jump back to Valerie then, because I know you were kind of alluding to this in that you had those initial goals set out. It sounds like very much through that process, but then you've noticed that those perhaps those goals have changed, or the results that you've seen in your win-loss program have started to shift your focus. So I'm curious if you could dive into that, or what you're working on right now, perhaps, if it's relevant.
So when we're doing win-loss, we have a core set of questions that we stick with, because we want to know importance of what the buyer's looking for, importance of how our sales team is engaging with them across the sales cycle. But maybe we would want to measure how a recent product launch went, or maybe how some new messaging was presented in the sales cycle. And so we may pull out data specific to that in the interview guide and look for the qualitative results around what the customer's real impressions were, how did something resonate. And that's the great thing about being able to do a quarter over quarter program, is to be able to go back and look to see what was consistent in our surveying and in our questions, as well as where did we see the conversations sort of shift as we brought forth new initiatives and new features.
Interesting. So if I'm hearing that correctly, Valerie, you're getting these insights, and through those rounds, or I guess continuations of the program as it's evolved, there is this kind of elevation that's happening, perhaps by from previous results, but it sounds like it's compounding. It's not like there's just this one blast of intel or insights. That kind of round of insights can actually help inform the next round, and it becomes this kind of additive process, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yes. What we hear sometimes in interviews, we may not have considered before bringing up in the discussion. So maybe there are customers who bring up topics that we hadn't really focused on, and maybe we hear it multiple times, and it's like, okay, I think we need to dive into this a little bit more next quarter, because it's something that bubbled up enough that we want to carry it forward. So there's a lot of great learning from having these conversations with buyers and those who were losses, to understand what should we be looking at that we hadn't been looking at already. Right.
And so I'll toss it to you, Derek, because I'd love to hear from you. But I just want to share just something that triggered in my mind, because actually at Klue, we run a win-loss program in partnership with DoubleCheck as well. And that fully resonates with me in that we just did a kind of cohort around losses to competitors, and we found some key reasons that were surfaced from that. And now we're looking at our next cohort to look at wins versus those competitors. And because we learned what those losses are, we're going to incorporate that into the wins. How did they get over those same objections? And so I think we wouldn't have gotten to those insights or thought to even investigate that area if it wasn't for that first set of interviews. So it's almost like you're getting to further and further layers. Insert your analogy if it's an onion or an iceberg or what have you, but you're getting deeper and deeper as you get more insights. So yes, I'd love to hear from you, Derek, in terms of how that has kind of evolved at Forrester and within your own program as well.
Sure. Yeah. I like I'll go with the onion. All right. It's all additive. So I think you do, we come into some of these studies with hypotheses, and there's a lot of folklore around these, right? People have opinions that, hey, they must be right. They've been working here. They know what's going on. And you learn something new from every conversation. And I think, one of the benefits of trying to do this in depth through interviews is you are able to get to that level of detail and put some things on the table that aren't that obvious that you can build on. So I think there's definitely I'll go back to the iceberg. There's a snowball effect to this in general. One other thing to throw on there too, just because we are focused on clients, is that there's detective work involved in this. So it's all about value delivery, which is very much in line with the mission of CX. But when you're speaking with clients, so they believed in the company and they made the purchase. And hopefully these are win interviews, right, or retention interviews, and we're finding out how we were able to deliver on that and what worked well. But when it does go off the track, you can learn, what is the difference, right? You believed in us to sign the contract, but then maybe you didn't to renew. Where did it go off the track? And it can go a number of different directions. And I think there's a tremendous amount of insight to be learned from really having that investigation.
Totally. I love the kind of both analogies there. One, the detective one. I mean, we are Klue, and that's very much where our inspiration came from. Is in our roles, whether it's win-loss or competitive enablement or understanding the market, there is this element of connecting the dots and taking clues, if you will, or hints from data sets and putting them together. So I love that. And so I'm curious, maybe to hear from you, Ryan. Is that something that you see as consistent across clients you work with? Is that something that you'd say as, dare I say, like kind of a best practice to do? Or how do you think about that evolution as a client continues using DoubleCheck or evolves their program over time?
We hope. I mean, that's the goal, is to have a kind of a longitudinal program over time so that you can compare and contrast. Some people do treat win-loss programs as projects, and they want to just drop in, collect a lot of information on a specific topic or competitor, and then they want to step back out. So we believe in the value of ongoing research, being able to identify those shifts in the marketplace that you can react and respond to. So love programmatic approaches, but we also believe in being agile. So when Valerie talked about we use the same questions, absolutely, because you want that consistency so that you can analyze the data, but those questions have to shift from quarter to quarter. As Valerie had mentioned, with new topics coming up, you want to make sure to double down on those areas. So, we call that an agile win-loss program for that reason. So, yeah.
Gotcha. So it sounds like there's a bit of a balance there. You want the consistency so that you're not changing too many variables. But if you learn something through the program, of course, you'd want to incorporate that learning perhaps into the rest of the program. And so I want to actually tie back to something you said, Derek, and as we think about kind of the distribution of insights, I love that you share around the folklore, right? And this is something that resonates, I think, in competitive enablement programs, is you kind of have this hypothesis, or either you have that hypothesis or different stakeholders, different teams have their own hypotheses. And win-loss, I guess in my mind, very much is a way of confirming or rejecting those hypotheses with data. And so I'm curious if anyone here thinks about when it comes to distributing those insights, do you ever package those win-loss insights together with other kinds of intel, let's say, whether that's through CRM or other insights, or like, how do you think about that when it comes to distributing win-loss insights? Does anyone have perhaps a story they can share, or way that you've been thinking about that?
I'm happy to. Sure. So I mentioned earlier that I view win-loss as another vehicle of voice of customer. So when we deliver voice of customer throughout the organization, it's never one-dimensional. We try to say, hey, here's what we're hearing through our surveys. Here's what we're hearing through win-loss. Here's what we're hearing through voice of voice of employee, or through our website feedback. So it always has to be in context of of that information, because without it, you run the risk of people saying, well, are you sure it's not just one customer saying that? Or maybe, okay, you heard it from two people. You have to triangulate that to really build your story. And I think if you provide evidence across different listening posts and package that together, it's really powerful. And it has credibility.
I love that.
Yes.
Yeah, I like the term triangulation. Sorry, Valerie, I was just going to toss it to you, actually. How do you think of that?
Definitely building on what Derek said. When we look at our win-loss, there's the analysis that we do with the help of DoubleCheck, but there's also the deeper numbers across the percentages of wins versus losses and what trends we may get from the seller notes to layer on top of what we hear in the interviews. And then I always mix it in with, well, what are we seeing in the marketplace? What are the trends in our space? What sort of announcements have been made around our space, either from the analyst community or from our competitors, so that it factors into what I'm reporting out? Because win-loss is one point, but you have to look at the greater overall win-loss. You have to look at what products across your product offering, and then share back. And one of the reasons that a lot of our information resonates with our product team is because they're doing a lot of the voice of the customer information, and they want to be able to attribute what they're hearing back into the win-loss to see, is there a correlation there? Because we're talking to net new customers, whereas they're talking to customers who've been with us for a while. So there's a lot of opportunity to really layer in the levels of knowledge that we're gathering.
Awesome. So I'm hearing though that there's a consistency around voice of customer, and that's like a really important message here. And even if you're interviewing, like you said, net new business or lost business, there is still that triangulation that can happen between perhaps what the product team is doing around voice of customer and what you're hearing in the market. And then even to your point, Valerie, perhaps other external market signals. And I just love that term you mentioned, Derek, around like triangulating. It's just, how do you get these data points so that you can kind of reinforce the hypothesis and say, hey, this is not just, yes, there's some great data within win-loss, but here are other things that we're seeing. And win-loss, it sounds like, and not to put words in everyone's mouth, but it really drives the thesis and takes it from kind of folklore or a hypothesis to something more firm. Maybe Ryan, if you have any final comments on that, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think we have to meet the consumers of win-loss data where they go, right? So do they go to Seismic for information, and is Seismic the place that everything else kind of meets, so that you're providing a fully formed story to sales or to leadership? Is it Klue that people go to by taking the win-loss data and inserting it with all the other data that Klue pulls into their platform on the battle card side? Is it teaching salespeople to do a bit of a better job on collecting intelligence from buyers and being a little bit more accountable to putting that data into the CRM system in a way that's actionable and meaningful? So we see a lot of people do a lot of different things to pull information together to supplement win-loss or competitive intelligence to be able to provide a fully formed view of what's going on.
Awesome. And so looks like we're running out of time before the live Q&A session. So if we could, I'm just going to go around the horn quickly. If you could share one, in one sentence, ideally, if you're speaking to someone right now that's just building out their win-loss program and just getting started, what advice would you have for them? And maybe we'll start with Derek.
Sure. Yeah, I think packaging the information is absolutely critical, and your key stakeholders are your executives. So package it for them in a way that it matters, right? So don't throw 1,000 things at them. Give them the top 3 headlines of what you learned.
Awesome. How about you, Valerie?
So I would say align your stakeholders. Make sure that there's value to each team you're presenting results to, and provide recommendations on the results that they're seeing. So what can be done with the takeaways from that quarter's win-loss analysis?
Awesome. And how about you, Ryan?
Same. I think Valerie and Derek hit it on the nail on the head. You have to go talk to your stakeholders when you're launching a program. Sit down with them, take notes, ask what they're looking for. Don't try to necessarily come up with your own deliverables. Ask what they're looking for, and then build deliverables around their particular use cases.
Love it. Right on time. So everyone, thanks for tuning in and joining us. Now you should be able to hop on over to the live roundtable for some Q&A, or you're also able to connect with other attendees one-on-one. Thanks again for joining us.